this experiment
इतना
section.
दिन क्या so we will start our online reading session, the book Mood and Mission of Srila Prabhupada, by chanting the pranam mantras, taking blessings from Samis Bhakti Vikas Maharaj and Acharyas. ओम अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामी नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत वेदांत श्रीवासुदेव गौरवृंद। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे मुखम करति वाचालं मंगलं गायति गिरिमित्कृपातं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं परमानन्दं सच्चिदानन्दं। गुरुवे गौरचन्द्राय राधिकाय तदालय कृष्णाय कृष्णभक्ताय तद्भक्ताय नमो नमः। वाग्मीशायस्य लक्ष्मीर्यस्य च यस्यास्ति हृदये संवित्तं नृसिंहं चेत् योऽन्तः प्रविश्य ममाचमाद्रसतां सञ्जीवयत् कुलशक्तिधरस्वधर्म्यां च हस्तचरणश्रवणत्वकारि प्राणान् नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यम्। निज गुरु हरिवान्य कृष्ण चित्तो विचिंतो परिपति पुत्र गेहा दंड संसार कुपहा प्रोपजन स्काप्तो मज्जेन संसृष्टो जय विकास। Hare Krishna. So I will read for few pages and then Shamkun Prabhu, you can take over. Okay?
Yes, Prabhu.
I don't have the book or right now. Can anybody tell what is the page number in the book? Experiments. From there we are reading. Actually. Does anybody know what is the page number in the book?
Which chapter is this? Prabhuji?
This is no chapter. I don't remember. This is part 2. Srila Prabhupada's success. You have the book?
Yes.
You have the book?
Yes,
Okay.
I have.
In that there is Srila Prabhupada's success part 2. In that there is a section called experiments. I think that is success, something relating to success. I don't have the book, so I don't know. It's quite a bit, so I'll read. Okay. I'll read this section and next section Prabhuji can read. Okay. Did you get the page number?
No. There is.
Okay. Nobody has the book. I don't know. I am here, so that's why I don't have the book. Oh, Krishna. No problem. Everybody can follow through the screen. That's fine. I'm controlling the screen. Okay. So we'll start. Experiments. Reflecting on his first days in the visit in the West, Srila Prabhupada sometimes referred to the experiments, quote unquote, he had made in his efforts to spread Krishna consciousness in an inclement culture. In a 1970 letter, Srila Prabhupada referred to the whole of his previous 3 years as an quote unquote experiment. Reference 2729, letter 23rd May 1970. Indeed, his entire Western outreach program could be considered a mass spiritual and social experiment. In Brahmananda Das's words, quote, At the beginning, we were like Prabhupada's guinea pigs, or better still, his laboratory rats, unquote. 2730, reference quoted by Manmohini Devi Dasi, Vyas Puja offering 2015. Being, quote, strong and fixed in purpose but flexible in methodology, unquote, 2723 reference. Guru Prasad Swami, Vyasa Puja offering 2020. Being strong and fixed in purpose but flexible in methodology, Srila Prabhupada knew what he wanted to give and had full faith in its efficacy. But he was exploring how to communicate it within such an alien culture. He was ready to explore various possibilities that arose, for instance, the opportunity to attend the Congress for Cultivating Human Spirit in Japan in 1961. 2732, reference C. Satswarup Das Goswami, Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, chapter 10, quote, this momentous hour of need, unquote. Religious history could have unfolded quite differently had that attempt fructified, which is also true regarding plans in late 1969 for Srila Prabhupada to be a resident teacher at a college in Pennsylvania. Reference to 733. C. Stephen J. Rosen, Swamiji, page number 102. Separately, there were discussions about him taking a similar role at a university in Berkeley. Reference to 734. See letter 2nd November 1969. For various reasons, neither prospect fructified, but, quote, had the proposal been instituted, ISKCON might have developed in a very different way with greater regard for the scholarly community and vice versa. 2735, reference Stephen J. Rosen, Swamiji, page 102. His first endeavor in New York, even before he had any followers, was to establish a temple. But for that, he needed financial assistance from India, which was not forthcoming, and eventually he dropped or rather postponed the plan. 2736 reference. See many letters from 10th November 1965 to late 1966. As he later reminisced, reminds. What? How do you say this? How do you pronounce this? Reminisced. 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 Quote, I came here with determinations to start a temple in New York first, but at that time, 10 years before in 1965, it was not possible. Unquote. Reference to 737, lecture 9th July 1976. An early disciple, Brahmananda Das, recalled Srila Prabhupada telling him, quote, in New York, I was experimenting with how to give people the chanting, unquote. 2738, reference. Stephen J. Rosen, Swamiji, page 30. An instance of such experimenting is Srila Prabhupada's instructing his first disciples to chant 64 rounds every day, reducing the requirement to 32 in response to their protests, and finally setting for no less than 16. 2739 reference, derived from Haigriva Das, the Hare Krishna Explosion, chapter 4, Mukunda Goswami, Miracle on 2nd Avenue, chapter 21. Another form of experimenting with chanting was with freestyle kirtan in the storefront in New York in 1966. Markedly different from what he later allowed. The innards of an upright piano waiting on the curb with someone's garage, and they had brought it to the temple and placed it near the entrance. During a kirtan, free-wheeling guests would run their hands over the wires, creating strange vibrations. A large chimbal hung from the ceiling, dangling close by the Swamiji's dais. 2740 reference, Satsvarup Das Goswami, Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, chapter 19, planting the seed. Intuiting that it will take some time to understand what Krishna's plan is. 2741 reference, letter 21st January 1968. Srila Prabhupada also encouraged his disciples to experiment. Tax your brain to create programs for engaging the wider and wider classes of population in Krishna consciousness. 2742 reference, letter 9th January 1972. He often gave general directions for his disciples to implement by trial and error. As Satsvarup Das Goswami recalled, you were always giving us ideas. You told us that some of the ideas were more like suggestions that you might suggest something else later. Reference 2743. Satsvarup Das Goswami, Prabhupada Meditations 4.1.1. A prominent example is Srila Prabhupada's letting it be known that he wanted his books widely distributed. It was up to his disciples to find the ways and means to do so. Yes. Okay. Srila Prabhupada's monitoring of his disciples' experiments much affected the directions the movement took. Some he approved, others not. For instance, he is sanctioning the wearing of questioners while distributing books. 2744. Reference Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Leela, chapter 14, text 5 purport. Opening new avenues of devotee behavior and sales techniques. And had he not terminated the roadshow, 2745, reference, letter 5th November 1972. Quite likely, such rock operas would have come to largely influence ISKCON's very nature and identity. Okay, I will tell something over here. See roadshow. Okay, Maharaj is writing. Had he not terminated the roadshow, quite likely such rock operas would have become the norm. So nowadays the bhajan clubbing is becoming famous like anything. So it is more or less like a show. Showbiz. Bhajan clubbing is like that. Nobody says that it is wrong. That is going on. Hare Krishna. Many temples are doing it. There's so much crowd pulling. So many devotees. They are becoming, if they know to pump harmonium, if they know how to play mridanga, if they know how to play guitar, violin, saxophone, you can become one of the bhajan clubbing gang. Notwithstanding this trial and error approach, continuing, when after ISKCON was well established, Tamal Krishna Goswami asked Srila Prabhupada if given a chance, he would do. That's all. What? He would do anything differently. Srila Prabhupada replied, no, I would do everything exactly as we have done it. Tamal Krishna Goswami surmised that everything that Srila Prabhupada had done was being directly motivated and guided by Krishna. 2747 reference. Lecture by Tamal Krishna Goswami, 25th March 1979. This must be so because the personality of Godhead directs everything for one who is a soul surrendered unto him. 2748 reference. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 5, Text 17 purport. Okay, Shyamakunda Prabhu, please.
Yes. Adjustments and adaptability. Because he was connected to the essence, Srila Prabhupada was able to maintain consistency even while innovating. As early as 1967, he wrote, I have nothing new to instruct you. The same old instruction, namely, constant chanting and attentively hearing the transcendental vibration Hare Krishna is the only process for self-realization in this age. He was
Reference.
Reference 2749. Letter 29 September 1967. He was simultaneously a shrewd judge of time, place, and circumstances, with the courage to make relevant and necessary adjustments and innovations, yet also fully fixed in maintaining uncompromised the original teachings and essential principles of Krishna consciousness. Thus, Srila Prabhupada's willingness to experiment should not be seen as a trivialization of the pristine practices of Krishna Bhakti. Rather, he aimed to introduce, as soon as was feasible, the Vedic culture that in India had always been inseparable from the practice of Krishna Bhakti. As Dr. Selingut observed, Bhaktivedanta's vision was certain. His aim was to transplant an ancient Indian religious tradition to the West. The various adjustments, reorganizations, or redefinitions he made were but means for the realization of this one superordinate goal. Reference 2750. Charles Selingut, Charisma and Religious Innovation, ICJ 4 to December 1996.
ICJ means ISKCON Communications Journal.
Mm. So, see, these references they break the flow. So, can we skip the
Sorry?
reading out references? Can be skipped?
Okay, you can skip if you want. Yeah, you can read.
Mhm.
Okay, continue reading.
Yes, sir. Although the soil of the West was fertile, transplantation was not easy. The problem is to take an ancient religious tradition, long isolated from the impact of modernity, and retrofit it for the modern world, while at the same time transplanting it from its native soil into multiple outside cultures and civilizations, all without vitiating or distorting its essential practices and doctrines. Srila Prabhupada's ability
Oh,
to
I'm sorry.
adjust,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm habituated to that. Okay.
Srila Prabhupada's ability to adjust to people and circumstances was a key to his imparting Krishna consciousness in various climes and cultures throughout the world, while consistently presenting the same message. He was prepared to mix with all kinds of people in all kinds of situations for that message to be received and implemented. Furthermore, that he could judiciously choose from among the myriad teachings and practices that comprise Gaudiya Vaishnavism what to teach, how to teach it, and in what order is a mark of Srila Prabhupada's genius and a critical factor in his success. Dr. Hopkins noted, much of the success of ISKCON in its early years is because Prabhupada understood the difference between core identity and non-essentials, what one could never let go of, and what could be altered or set aside. He was adamant about the central importance of devotion to Krishna, for example, but was willing to deviate from orthodox Varnashram Dharma rules when he considered it necessary to further the propagation of devotion. In this and
Prabhuji,
other respects,
Hare Krishna, can
yes,
you
Prabhu.
please lead little bit loudly
Okay,
and clear? Okay, little bit more
yes, Prabhu.
enthusiastically. Sorry.
Okay. In this and other respects, Prabhupada was following the tradition of Chaitanya and of his Gaudiya Vaishnava predecessors, such as Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, all of whom placed the demands of devotion far above the demands of orthodox social or even ritual regulations, including regulations dealing with such matters as initiation. All of them also, of course, knew the rules of orthodoxy well enough and knew devotion well enough to know exactly what they were doing and why. With such insight and expertise, Srila Prabhupada exhibited extraordinary adaptability to various situations unimaginable before he ventured west, even though he was opposed to the fundamental assumptions of Western culture, any attempt to immediately impose orthodox Gaudiya standards would have stymied his mission at the outset. While there was no question of wholesale adopting Western culture, he could adapt to it because he was conscious of what he referred to as the importance of time, place, and circumstance. Flexibility and innovativeness were required, reciprocating with Srila Prabhupada's determination to do the needful and stick with it through all difficulties. Krishna granted him extraordinary intelligence to quickly grasp the exigencies and necessities of varied and unpredictable situations, and to make adjustments as required, but only if required. From the very beginning of his stay in America, Srila Prabhupada's willingness to adjust to others and to make adjustments for their cultural conditioning allowed him to gain a foothold. He even adjusted the strict standards governing his status as a sannyasi, yet he never compromised his message or mission. While adapting to the Zidgist, his aim was to change it, enter like a needle and come out like a plow, was the Bengali adage he cited in this regard. First, he had to make adjustments for the hippies of America, regarding whom only he could lead them. One instance that well demonstrates Srila Prabhupada's adaptability was his appearance at the Mantra Rock Dance at the Avalon Ballroom in San Francisco in 1967. The wildness he encountered there was quite foreign to his aristocratic, scholarly background, yet he perfectly interacted with the drug-crazed hippies to invoke in them as much Krishna consciousness as was possible by inducing them to chant the Mahamantra and dance wildly. Shortly thereafter, he visited a nudist colony where he inspired people to chant Hare Krishna and planted seeds of bhakti that later fructified in several commune members joining his movement and becoming prominent leaders. In accord with the hippie tenet of going with the flow, Srila Prabhupada expertly blended into the hippie flow his own devotional fusion of music, bells, colorful robes, and saris, incense, flowers, fabulous vegetarian food, a spirit of sharing and openness, and a spiritualism that was unmistakably Eastern, yet with its own unique flavor, quite different from what other Oriental godmen had to offer. Seeing the condition in Head Ashbury, which he referred to as the darkest of darkness, Srila Prabhupada directed the devotees to profusely feed hippies at the new ISKCON storefront there. Again, the perfect prescription for that time and place. Knowing that most Westerners were not ready for an immediate major cultural shift, Srila Prabhupada was ready to introduce them to Krishna consciousness in settings familiar to them, rather than an Indian style temple. At the newly acquired church in Los Angeles, where it was to become ISKCON's world headquarters. He wanted to retain the pews, pulpit, organ, and stained glass windows so that regular Americans could enter wearing shoes and sit on benches to hear kirtan and talks on Bhagavad Gita. Not only in the West was Srila Prabhupada prepared to make unprecedented adjustments. In 1972, to further the Sankirtan movement in India, he stopped public Sankirtan. Western devotees' public chanting was at first very well received in India. But when Srila Prabhupada noted some negative impressions it was creating, he instituted another approach. Public chanting, Harinam, was a successful strategy for spreading Krishna consciousness in the West. But when Prabhupada had his disciples introduce Harinam Sankirtan in India, it was not effective. Rather, it created a negative impression of our movement, despite the fact that Lord Chaitanya had propagated Krishna consciousness throughout India by Harinam Sankirtan 500 years ago. Prabhupada was able to assess the situation and devise a program of life membership in India, which proved to be very successful. Giriraj Swami described, when we first arrived in India, we thought we should do Harinam in the streets. every day, as we had done in America. We were shocked when Srila Prabhupada said, if you chant in the streets in India, people will think you are beggars. In India, many people chant in the streets just to get some paisa. Further elaboration from Madhudrish Das. In Calcutta, our preaching involved going out on the street, having Harinam, distributing back to Godheads, etc. We went to Dalhousie Square in the midday sun. Only mad dogs and Englishmen were around, and we started chanting Hare Krishna. After a few weeks of that, Srila Prabhupada said, this is not going to be our approach here in India. And he conceived of this whole program of making life members to spread Krishna consciousness. The reason why he told us not to just have street kirtan, as we had been doing in America for so many years, was because he understood that the Indian people would not appreciate Krishna consciousness and would think that we were lower class. We were not spreading Krishna consciousness on a very high level. So Srila Prabhupada dissuaded us from the kirtans on the street and told us to make life members. And from Tamal Krishna Goswami, concluding with an observation that summarizes the matter. By 1970, active street Sankirtan, chanting Hare Krishna on the streets and distributing back to Godhead magazines, had been going on for a year or a year and a half in America. And when we arrived in India in 1970, we applied the same formula. We chanted Hare Krishna on the streets, but some people ridiculed us, and there were newspaper articles in the same mood. When Prabhupada heard this, and he heard that people were throwing coins at us, he told us to immediately stop doing daily street kirtan because people were taking it cheaply. Later things changed a little, but it was significant that Prabhupada was willing to completely adjust the fundamental strategy of street chanting if he didn't have the desired effect. A preacher has to be an expert judge of time, place, and circumstance, and know how to present Krishna consciousness in an effective way to the local population. One formula may be totally unsuitable in another place. One of Prabhupada's most outstanding qualities was how he knew which formula was suitable for which place. He wasn't a stereotype thinker. As late as 1977, Srila Prabhupada made a major change in one of the most basic devotional activities that he had introduced at the very beginning of his Western teaching. He ordered to cease the chanting of Bhaja before Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advait Gadadhar, Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Gradualism.
Okay, Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu.
Prabhu, we read section by section. So once the another devotee reads, you may also read it. Okay.
You are sorry, couldn't follow.
Okay. Yes, Prabhu.
You are saying to me?
You're not able to hear me?
Yeah, I was not able to make out. We
Yeah,
have to
I was
read.
saying that we read section by section, and you read one section, so I will make one more devotee to read another
Yes,
section, and
yes,
like
please.
that we are reading. Okay?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Shamsaru Prabhu, you can read it.
Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
All right.
Gradualism. Dr. Charles Selengat analyzed Srila Prabhupada's quote unquote religious gradualism and its need and efficacy. The theme of flexibility amidst tradition, change, and continuity is particularly seen in Prabhupada's religious gradualism. He did not introduce the full Indian religious liturgy immediately, but waited, adding little by little, so that by 1969-70, temple practices and ascetic discipline were almost the equivalent of their Indian counterparts. In the early period, 1966 to 1968, temple services were informal and to a degree, even spontaneous expressions of the particular group that happened to assemble. Though the Hare Krishna mantra was chanted at each meeting, the formal structure of the Indian ritual was not yet followed. Thomas Hopkins, an early scholarly observer of ISKCON, noted that, quote, people would come in off the street bringing whatever instrument they happened to play and simply dive into the bhajana. Very few really knew at that point that there was a formal structure, unquote. Gradually, however, these informal gatherings gave way to a more structured and traditional form of worship. By 1969, Hopkins tells us disciples now celebrate daily worship with morning puja to the image of Krishna in their temple shrine and with evening kirtana. Celebrate Hindu holy days, perform regular daily chanting of rounds of Krishna mantras using their bead rosaries, have learned Indian musical styles and adopted Indian food and dress, and in an amazing way, for such a short period of time, have assimilated their living patterns to a Hindu model. The early initiations of disciples were also frequently spontaneous and informal affairs, as were the first ISKCON as were the first ISKCON weddings. Some of the early devotees were not even clear as to the full meaning of the regulative principles, the rules prohibiting meat eating, intoxication, illicit sex, and gambling. Prabhupada's willingness to be flexible and tolerate ambiguity made the transition of Krishna consciousness to America possible. A premature demand for complete ritual and personal religious orthodoxy might have left ISKCON stillborn. Understanding that, quote, it takes a little time to understand the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, unquote, Srila Prabhupada's immediate aim was to somehow establish Krishna consciousness in the West, and he was prepared to make the considerable adjustments required to secure a foothold in that insalubrious environment. He was confident that if the essentials were in place, and if he could train at least a few intelligent and sincere practitioners, then, as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura had stated, although, quote, nothing is absolutely pure in the beginning, from imperfection, purity will come about, unquote. Although Srila Prabhupada's idea of what to do was definite, his method of teaching it was careful and gradual. Still, he, quote, accommodated as little as possible to the consuetude customs of modern America, unquote, and from the outset planned to gradually introduce all the technicalities of Krishna conscious culture. This astonished Allen Ginsberg, who doubted it possible. Ginsberg, what's the future of a religious observance so technical as this, so complicated as this? It requires so much sophistication in terms of diet, daily ritual, arati, ekadashi, the whole thing that you have been teaching. How far can that spread by its very complexness? Srila Prabhupada. Yes, all are complex. The whole idea is to keep the devotees always engaged in Krishna consciousness. That is the program. Gradually, we shall introduce more and more so that he has no scope to go outside Krishna consciousness. Considering that Vedic culture is vast, complex, multifaceted, and often appears bewildering to the Western mind, Srila Prabhupada introduced its rules and regulations only gradually, starting with very little, less than 1%. I am just introducing one after another, little by little, but for those practicing this Krishna consciousness in India, There are so many rules and regulations. Somebody somebody says that, quote, Swamiji is very conservative. He has got so many rules and regulations, unquote. But I have not introduced 1% because it is not possible to introduce all those rules and regulations in your country. Stating that, quote, we have to educate people gradually, unquote, Srila Prabhupada sought to find a little fire, a spark of interest in Krishna consciousness, and then encourage it. Quote, fanning, and it becomes a big fire, unquote. He cited Srila Rupa Goswami in this regard. Rupa Goswami advises, Yena tena prakarena manah Krishna niveshayet sarve vidhi nishedha syur etayor eva kinkaraha. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 124 128. Somehow or other, you fix up your mind on Krishna. So when I started this movement, somehow or other, I tried to fix up the mind of these boys in Krishna. In the beginning, I never said that, quote, you have to do this, you have to do that, unquote. To an Indian audience, Srila Prabhupada explained his preaching policy in the West. Srila Rupa Goswami directs in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, quote, somehow or other engage people in Krishna consciousness, unquote. Yena tena prakarena manah Krishna niveshayet sarve vidhi nishedaha syur etayor eva kinkaraha. Just like in Europe and America, some of our friends criticize that, quote, Swami Maharaj is not doing this, not doing that, unquote. We are doing everything, but our main business is just to induce them to Krishna consciousness. That is the secret. You have to induce them. Then, even if there are some discrepancies in the rules and regulations, it does not matter. Rupa Goswami says, Sarve vidhi nishedah syur etayor eva kinkaraha. First of all, we must be Krishna conscious somehow or other. We must find out. It can be changed according to country, climate, and circumstances. But we have to see by the result whether one has become Krishna conscious. That is wanted. Then we say that this is the rule. Don't do this. In the beginning, we have many difficulties because their behavior, their culture, everything is just opposite. How you can expect that everything is to the right point? That is not possible. So we have to find out a means how he becomes Krishna conscious. That is my first business. So that is the secret. Give people a chance to understand Krishna consciousness. Being a consummately practical acharya, Srila Prabhupada summarized his policy thus. An acharya should devise a means by which people may somehow or other come to Krishna consciousness. First, they should become Krishna conscious, and all the prescribed rules and regulations may later gradually be introduced. In our Krishna consciousness movement, we follow this policy of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. For example, since boys and girls in the Western countries freely intermingle, special concessions regarding their customs and habits are necessary to bring them to Krishna consciousness. The Acharya must devise a means to bring them to devotional service. In brief, some way or other, let him come in contact with Krishna. He will be benefited. Some way or other, let him come to the light. It may be dim light or very big light. Light is light. Always, quote, doing the needful, unquote, and being Desha Kala Artha Tattvajna, very experienced according to time, place, and circumstances. Initially, Srila Prabhupada allowed his followers to do some things that he later forbade. Examples are his tolerating loose mixing between the sexes and male disciples having long hair. In New York in 1966, Srila Prabhupada, quote, was an often indulgent father to sincere but confused converts, unquote, who, quote, never rebuked his charges and seemed to have an infinite store of patience. He also functioned as surrogate parent, friend, and confidant, unquote. No one worried about not understanding the philosophy or committing countless offenses. All we knew was that when we went to Srila Prabhupada, we had fun. He was a sage, grandfather, spiritual master, and favorite uncle all rolled into one. And although by solar calculations he was over 70, he was younger than any of us. As he sat and ate with us, chatted and laughed, we little knew how much we or thousands of others would come to love him as the only truly lovable person in our lives, as our only link to Krishna in a dark and guideless universe. Although we were with Prabhupada, he wasn't revealing everything to us at once, but he was cultivating us by letting us render service to him, which was all we knew. Having established his first storefront temple in New York's Lower East Side, Srila Prabhupada set about shaping his fresh recruits into useful assistants. However, his movement really started to take off in San Francisco in 1967 with literally thousands of hippies enthusiastically participating, albeit mostly at a rudimentary, uncommitted level. There, in accord with the need of the situation, quote, he gave the philosophy and pastimes in bite-sized pieces for good digestion and assimilation, unquote. Quote, the Swami kept everything simple, little by little spoon feeding the complexities of genuine spiritual life to his sincere, loving neophytes. Unquote. Quote, he only gradually raised. He only gradually raised the standards of his followers. Most of them were not much more than hippies having a good time eating and singing in the storefront. Quote, chant Hare Krishna and be happy, unquote, was his main message. Only later did he emphasize surrender, dedication, and Anya Bhilashita Shunya Bhakti. Observing that, quote, my disciples are only children, unquote, Srila Prabhupada appreciated their baby steps in devotional service, encouraging encouraging them to chant and take prasada and praising whatever good they did without dwelling on their shortcomings. When they came to me, I never said, quote, you don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. No, you simply come here and chant Hare Krishna. Old students learned. I never said that, quote, you have to follow these rules, these regulations, then you can come, unquote. Because if chanting is properly done, then Cheto Darpana Marjanam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antyalila, chapter 20, text 12, the mind will be cleansed of all dirty things. Shinvatam Swakatah, Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtanaha. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, chapter 2, text 17. Simply by hearing and chanting, they will be pious. Hridyantastho Hyabhadrani vidhunoti suhrit satam. Krishna is there. As soon as he sees one devotee is sincerely chanting, he'll help cleansing the heart. I started this movement on this determination that I'll give them prasada, nice chanting, and will they not come? They must come. I never said. quote, you have to give up this, you have to do this, you have to, unquote, never said. Then gradually, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antyalila, chapter 20, text 12. Snippet from the 1960s. Do not worry too much about the rules and regulations. Just get everyone to chant Hare Krishna. Simply chant the holy name of the Lord, then everything will come to you automatically by and by. Of course, there are some rules and regulations for chanting, but in the beginning, we haven't got to observe those rules and regulations. First of all, let us have the taste for chanting. Then we shall be a little careful. Somehow or other, you engage your mind in this process, then everything will come automatically. You will know what to do. And there is the spiritual master's guidance. This is the beginning of Krishna consciousness. Chant Hare Krishna and dance in ecstasy, and everything will come within yourself gradually. As discussed in a conversation several years later, Lokanatha, you are so expert. For 1 year, you did not mention those rules and regulations, I heard. Srila Prabhupada, no, I simply said, come and join and chant. Lokanatha, and when they developed a higher taste, then you said, quote, now no more meat eating, unquote. Even though he was born in the last previous century, he was flexible according to changes in the world. Old school, new game, or old old wine, new bottles. He remained present without changing his core values. Although at first Srila Prabhupada hardly mentioned the many regulations given by Sadhu, Shastra, and Guru, and was abundantly tolerant of the weakness and ignorance of his followers, gradually, as they became more mature, he made them aware that Krishna consciousness demands high standards. Clearly, Srila Prabhupada would have preferred that his followers adopt high standards from the beginning, but he worked with what he had and only gently introduced the radical changes that he wished to institute. When the hippies become more serious, Swamiji discourages listening to mundane music and encourages shaving off hair and beards and exchanging bell bottom dungarees for robes. Shyamasundara Dasa recalled how he gave up cigarettes. In the beginning, he never told us we should stop smoking. We gave up drugs and drinking, but many of us kept on smoking, not really knowing that we weren't supposed to do. We didn't do it in his presence, but this went on for a couple months after we became devotees. Once, when Prabhupada came to my house on Haight Street, I was working on the final touches of paint on Jagannatha. I had a pack of cigarettes on the floor when I heard the door open and close. I didn't think Prabhupada would be coming, and all of a sudden, bam, I heard these cigarettes going flying across the floor. Prabhupada had hit them with his cane. He was standing there and said, quote, what is this? Unquote. I said, quote, those are cigarettes, Prabhupada. He said, quote, from this day on, no more smoking, unquote. So I stopped. Sometimes he would let things go on like that, and then suddenly he would get angry and stop it. Before long, Srila Prabhupada deliberately, step by step, weaned his disciples away from their cultural moorings and instituted practices that had always been standard for devotees in India. As Dr. Hopkins observed, What became evident was that Bhaktivedanta Swami did, in fact, have a plan which he was gradually implementing. A plan that involved bringing more and more of the authentic tradition over from India and putting it in place in the American or Western movement. He made his students more and more familiar with the philosophy. This I was expecting. What I did not expect and what really surprised and pleased me was the degree to which the ritual tradition was also brought over and put into place. That's something that no other movement has succeeded in doing, nor even really tried to do. Transplanting a traditional Hindu ritual structure into a Hindu religious movement in America. In parallel to this, Srila Prabhupada also began to assume a more traditional guru role, which, which required disciples' obedience and commitment. Satswarupa Dasa Goswami recalls Prabhupada was so strong, so much wanting to push forward the preaching, so demanding on his disciples. He was not always able to give his fullest time to individuals, but he demanded the utmost in practical work from each of us. He expected us to follow the rules without deviation, to chant our rounds without fail, to cut through the nonsense of self absorption and psychology, to surrender. He cut devotees who approached with something less than full surrender. He didn't reject them, but he didn't spend time on them. He reserved the right to be a gruff, demanding teaching father. No nonsense. In 1970, one of Srila Prabhupada's secretaries wrote, His Divine Grace has been very anxious that the regulated principles of devotional service not be neglected or minimized. That is, every devotee, without exception, must chant 16 rounds daily on the beats and follow the regulated principles strictly. Srila Prabhupada has said that this is the only way to become pure and remain free from personal ambition. Then, from 1972, Srila Prabhupada proposed to, quote, boil the milk, unquote, to focus on raising the standards of the present devotees rather than on canvassing for more recruits. Just one example of the many areas in which Srila Prabhupada expected his disciples to improve is found in a 1975 letter wherein he instructed a disciple in a manner unimaginable in the initial days. Quote, eating should be minimized. Too much eating leads to too much sleeping and then sex desire. Dr. Hopkins analyzed Srila Prabhupada's policy of first bringing people in and then bringing them up, thus aiming at both quantity and quality. His disciples' cultural background had not prepared them for the discipline and obedience to a spiritual master that he that he demanded. What Srila Prabhupada was doing was really quite extraordinary and unprecedented. Previous Indian or other Asian religious teachers had either accommodated their teachings and practices to Western culture or had limited their effort to a small group of close knit personal disciples who could be trained to a more rigorous standard. Srila Prabhupada, however, had tried from the beginning to involve as many people as possible in the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, and then as he gradually gathered a group of devotees, he invited them to chant along with him.
Hare Krishna. Ball. As many as people, as many people as possible. Hare Krishna, Shyam Swarup Prabhu. I think his connection got cut. Hare Bol, Shyam Swarup Prabhu. Okay. As many people as possible in the chanting of Hare Krishna mantra, and then as he gradually gathered a group of disciples around him, had begun to train them to follow the strict standards of his own Chaitanya tradition, to become vegetarians, to maintain personal purity, to study the texts and teachings of the tradition, to practice systematic devotional chanting, to learn the proper ways of the deity worship. Oh Krishna. And for those who accepted initiation as formal disciples or sishyas, to shave their heads and wear the traditional clothing of Indian devotees. These standards were not only maintained but were in fact continually upgraded as the movement expanded first in North America and then throughout the world. No matter what the cultural background of the disciples, all were expected to obey their new spiritual master and follow the strict religious lifestyle that he demanded. They were expected, in other words, to become traditional Chaitanya devotees in every way possible, even as they were engaged in establishing new centers and recruiting new followers in Europe, Africa, Central and South America, the Far East, and even in India itself. There were, of course, tensions and misunderstandings created by these demands, and at times, serious splits within the organization. Not everyone understood what was expected of them. And there were mistakes made as a result of over enthusiasm, inexperience, misinterpretation, and sometimes willful resistance to Srila Prabhupada's requirements. Wow, this is very great observation. What is astonishing is that there were not many problems than there were, at least during Srila Prabhupada's lifetimes. Oh, what is not many problems? They think there are no problems. Lifetime, given the overall youthfulness of his followers and the fact that they were being faced with requirements and given responsibilities that would have been unimaginable a few years earlier. The credit for this must clearly go to Srila Prabhupada, whose role at the center of all of these developments was crucial to their initial success. As Dr. Hopkins elsewhere noted, you could see him very consciously and very patiently shaping people's devotional practices and their sense of who they were and bringing them to the standard. Similarly, Gurudas retrospectively observed, it's amazing how Srila Prabhupada was so patient. He introduced things very slowly. Gradually, as Srila Prabhupada became not only inspirational and encouraging, but also more demanding, students began to grasp that they had joined a religious establishment, formidable in its own right, that he was painstakingly grooming them to become heirs to an ancient and venerable spiritual tradition and scrupulous fidelity to its teachings and practices as of central importance to him. An incident occurred in the San Francisco storefront in 1967 that jolted the devotees present into a sense of their responsibility to impart Krishna consciousness to others. A discontent disciple, loudly declaring his resolve to leave the incipient movement, jumped up, stood dejectedly for a moment, and then rushed out, banging the door behind him. Ravindra Swarup's dramatic exit from Krishna consciousness shocked the devotees. Srila Prabhupada sat still and continued speaking to them gravely. So, gravely, asking them to stick together and push on the movement for their own benefit and for others. Whatever they had learned, he said, they should repeat. They realized whatever they wanted. They realized perhaps for the first time that they were part of a preaching mission a moment. They were together not just for good times and good vibrations, but they had a loving obligation to Swamiji and Krishna. Okay, so we will stop here and we will continue tomorrow at the same time, 7:15. Until then, thank you very much. We'll stop here. And if at all devotees want to ask something or add, or they can speak now. So if they want, you can speak now. If anybody wants to say something. Sorry, Shyam Swarup Prabhu, I had to take over because it was just
There was a blip in my connection, bro.
okay, no problem. I understood that. Yes, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, Mataji, anybody? Okay, we will stop here and we'll meet tomorrow. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुदेव च पीतानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जगत गुरु श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जगत भक्ति का स्वामी महाराज की जय। द मोटिवेशन ऑफ श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। गौड़ प्रेमनंदे। हरि हरि बोल। हरे कृष्ण। आयुष Sahai Srivastav. You are from which part of India, Prabhuji? Hare Krishna. Oh, he left. Okay, fine. No problem. Hare Krishna.